Chapter 7 Chapter 7 Of New Dominions Acquired by the Power of Others or by Fortune. Those who rise from private citizens to be princes merely by fortune have little trouble in rising, but very much in maintaining their position. They meet with no difficulties on the way as they fly over them, but all their difficulties arise when they are established. Such are they who are granted estate either for money or by favor of him who grants it, as happened to many in Greece and in the cities of Ionia and of the Hellespont, who were created princes by Darius in order to hold these places for his security and glory. Such were also those emperors who from private citizens became emperors by bribing the army. Such as these depend absolutely on the goodwill and fortune of those who have raised them, but of which are extremely inconstant and unstable. They neither know how to, nor are in a position to maintain their rank, for unless he be a man of great genius, it is not likely that one who has always lived in a private position should know how to command. And they are unable to command because they possess no forces which will be friendly and faithful to them. Moreover, states quickly founded, like all other things which are born and grow rapidly, cannot have deep roots, so that the first storm destroys them, unless, as already said, the man who thus becomes a prince is of such great genius as to be able to take immediate steps for maintaining what fortune has thrown into his lap, and lay afterwards those foundations which others make before becoming princes. With regard to those with regard to these two methods of becoming a prince, by ability or by good fortune, I will here adduce two examples which have taken place within our memory, those of Francesco Sforza and Cesar Borgia. Francesco, by appropriate means and through great abilities, from citizen became Duke of Milan, and what he had attained after thousand difficulties he maintained with little trouble. On the other hand, Cesar Borgia, commonly called Duke Valentine, acquired the state through the fortune of his father, and by the same means lost it, and that although every measure was adopted by him and everything done that a prudent and capable man could do to establish himself firmly in that state that the arms and the favors of others had given him. For as we have said, he who does not lay his foundations beforehand may by great abilities do so afterwards, although with great trouble to the architect and danger to the building. If, then, one considers the progress made by the Duke, it will be seen how firm were the foundations he had laid to his fortune, to his future power, which I do not think it superfluous to examine, as I know of no better precepts for a new prince to follow than the examples of his actions, and if his measures were not successful, it was through no fault of his own, but only by the most extraordinary malignity of fortune. In wishing to aggrandize the Duke, his son, Alexander VI, had to meet very great difficulties, both present and future. In the first place, he saw no way of making him ruler of any state that was not a possession of the church. And in attempting to take that of the church, he knew that the Duke of Milan and the Venetians would not consent, because Faenza and Rimini were already under the protection of the Venetians. He saw, moreover, that the arms of Italy, especially of those who might have served him, were in the hands of those who would fear the greatness of the Pope, and therefore he could not depend upon them, being all under the Orsinis and Colonnas and their adherents. It was therefore necessary to disturb the existing condition and bring about disorders in the states of Italy in order to obtain secure mastery over a part of them. This was easy, for he found the Venetians, who, actuated by other motives, had invited the French into Italy, which he not only did not oppose, but facilitated by dissolving the marriage of King Louis. The king came thus into Italy with the aid of the Venetians and the consent of Alexander, and had hardly arrived at Milan before the Pope obtained troops from him for his enterprise in the Romagna, which he carried out by means of the reputation of the king. The Duke, having thus obtained the Romagna and defeated the Colonnas, was hindered in maintaining it and proceeding further by two things. The one, his forces, of which he doubted the fidelity; the other, the will of France, that is to say, he feared lest the arms of the Orsini, of which he had availed himself, should fail him, and not only hinder him in obtaining more, but take from him what he had already conquered. And he also feared that the king might do the same. He had evidence of this as regards the Orsini, when, after taking Faenza, he assaulted Bologna, and observed their backwardness in the assault. And as regards the king, he perceived his designs when, after taking the dukedom of Urbino, he attacked Tuscany, and the king made him desist from that enterprise, whereupon the duke decided to depend no longer on the fortunes and arms of others. The first thing he did was to weaken the parties of the Orsinis and Colonnas in Rome by gaining all their adherents who were gentlemen and making them followers of himself, by granting them large pensions and appointing them to commands and offices according to their rank, so that their attachment to their parties was extinguished in a few months, and entirely concentrated on the Duke. After this, he waited an opportunity for crushing the Orsinis, having dispersed the adherents of the Colonna family, and when the opportunity arrived, he made good use of it. For the Orsini, seeing at length that the greatness of the Duke and of the Church meant their own ruin, convoked a diet at Magione in the Perugino. Hence sprang the rebellion of Urbino and the tumults in Romagna, and infinite dangers to the Duke, who overcame them all with the help of the French, and having regained his reputation, neither trusting France nor other foreign forces in order not to have to oppose them, he had recourse to stratagem. He dissembled his aims so well that Orsini, through the mediation of Signor Pavolo, made their peace with him, which the Duke spared no efforts to make secure, presenting them with ropes, money, and horses, so that in their simplicity they were induced to come to Sinigaglia and fell into his hands. Having thus suppressed these leaders and made their partisans his friends, the Duke had laid a very good foundation to his power, having all the Romagna with the Duchy of Urbino, and having gained the favor of the inhabitants, who began to feel the benefit of his rule. And as this part is worthy of note and of imitation by others, I will not omit mention of it. When he took the Romagna, it had previously been governed by weak rulers, who had rather despoiled their subjects than governed them, and given them more cause for disunion than for union, so that the province was a prey to robbery, assaults, and every kind of disorder. He therefore judged it necessary to give them a good government in order to make them peaceful and obedient to his rule. For this purpose he appointed Misar Ramiro de Orco, a cruel and able man, to whom he gave the fullest authority. This man, in a short time, was highly successful in rendering the country orderly and united, whereupon the Duke, not deeming such excessive authority expedient, lest it should become hateful, appointed a civil court of justice in the middle of the province, under an excellent president, to which each city appointed its own advocate. And as he knew that the harshness of the past had engendered some amount of hatred, in order to purge the minds of the people and to win them over completely, he resolved to show that if any cruelty had taken place, it was not by his orders, but through the harsh disposition of his minister, and taking him on some pretext, he had him placed one morning in the public square at Cesena, cut in half with a piece of wood and blood-stained knife by his side, The ferocity of this spectacle caused the people both satisfaction and amazement. But to return to where we left off, the Duke, being now powerful and partly secured against present perils, being armed himself, and having in a great measure put down those neighboring forces which might injure him, and had now to get the respect of France, if he wished to proceed with his acquisitions, for he knew that the king, who had lately discovered his error, would not give him any help. He began, therefore, to seek fresh alliances, and to facilitate with France in the expedition that the French made towards the kingdom of Naples against the Spaniards, who were besieging Gaeta. His intention was to assure himself of them, which he would soon have succeeded in doing if Alexander had lived. These were the measures taken by him with regard to the present. As to the future, he feared that a new successor to the church might not be friendly to him, and might seek to deprive him of what Alexander had given him. And he sought to provide against this in 4 ways. Firstly, by destroying all who were of the blood of those ruling families which he had despoiled, in order to deprive the Pope of any opportunity. Secondly, by gaining the friendship of the Roman nobles, so that he might through them hold, as it were, the Pope in check. Thirdly, by obtaining as great a hold on the college as he could. Fourthly, by acquiring such power before the Pope died as to be able to resist alone the first onslaught. Of these 4 things he had at the death of Alexander accomplished 3, and the fourth he had almost accomplished. For of the dispossessed rulers he killed as many as he could lay hands on, and very few people escaped. He had gained to his party the Roman nobles, and he had a great share in the college. As to new possessions, he designed to become Lord of Tuscany, and already possessed Perugia and Piombino, and had assumed the protectorate over Pisa. And as he had no longer to fear the French, for the French had been deprived of the kingdoms of Naples by the Spaniards in such a way that both parties were obliged by his friendship, he seized Pisa. After this, Lucca and Siena at once yielded, partly through envy of the Florentines, and partly through fear. The Florentines had no resources, so that, had he succeeded as he had done before, in the very year that Alexander died, he would have gained such strength and renown as to be able to maintain himself without depending on the fortunes or strength of others, but solely by his own power and ability. But Alexander died 5 years after he had first drawn his sword. He left him with the state of Romagna, only firmly established, and all the other schemes in mid-air, between 2 very powerful and hostile armies, and suffering from a fatal illness. But the valor and ability of the Duke were such, and he knew so well how to win over men or vanquish them, and so strong were the foundations that he had laid in this short time, that if he had not had those 2 armies upon him, or else had been in good health, he would have survived every difficulty. And that his foundations were good is seen from the fact that the Romagna waited for him more than a month in Rome. Although half dead, he remained secure, and although the Baglioni, Vitelli, and Orsini entered Rome, they found no followers against him. He was able, if not to make Pope whom he wished, at any rate to prevent a Pope being created whom he did not wish. But if at the death of Alexander had been well, everything would have been easy. And he told me on the day that Pope Julius II was created that he had thought of everything which might happen on the death of his father, and provided against everything, except that he had never thought that at his father's death he would be dying himself. Reviewing thus all the actions of the Duke, I find nothing to blame. On the contrary, I feel bound, as I have done, to hold him up as an example to be imitated by all who by fortune and with the arms of others have risen to power. For with this great courage and high ambition, he could not have acted otherwise, and his designs were only frustrated by the short life of Alexander and his own illness. Whoever therefore deems it necessary in his new principality to secure himself against enemies, to gain friends, to conquer by force or fraud, to make himself beloved and feared by the people, followed and reverenced by the soldiers, to destroy those who can and may injure him, introduce innovations into old customs, to be severe and kind, magnanimous, and liberal, suppress the old militia, create a new one, maintain the friendship of kings and princes in such a way that they are glad to benefit him and fear to injure him. Such a one can find no better example than the actions of this man. The only thing he can be accused of is that in the creation of Julius II he made a bad choice. For as he has been for as has been said, not being able to choose his own pope, he could still prevent anyone being made pope, and he ought never to have permitted any of those cardinals to be raised to the papacy whom he had injured, or who, when pope, would stand in fear of him. For men commit injuries either through fear or through hate. Those whom he had injured were, among others, San Pietro, Advincula, Colonna, San Giorgio, and Ascanio, and all the others, if assumed to the pontificate, would have had to fear him except Rohan and the Spaniards, the latter through their relationship and obligations to him, the former from his great power, being related to the King of France. For these reasons, the Duke ought above all things to have created a Spaniard pope, and if unable to, then he should have consented to Rohan being appointed, and not San Pietro at Vincula. And whoever thinks that in high personages new benefits cause old offences to be forgotten, makes a great mistake. The Duke, therefore, erred in this choice, and it was the cause of his ultimate ruin.